Welcome to Good Sex at NYU, a podcast about sex, relationships, health, and mental health in a sex-positive space. So if you're looking for something serious, sometimes funny, and always sex-positive, then you're in the right place. I'm Danielle Elliman. I use she/her pronouns, and I'm the Associate Director of Sexual and Relationship Respect Services. This is Good Sex at NYU, your space for sex-positive conversations about relationships, sex, and well-being. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Good Sex at NYU. I'm Danielle Elliman, your host today, along with my co-host, Sage Latella.
Hello.
Hello. She's an MPH candidate at NYU. And before we get started in our conversation, I just want to acknowledge that today's episode might be a little activating for some people. We encourage you to take a break, do what you need to do to take care of yourself. But if you are an NYU student, you can reach out to Wellness Exchange at 212-443-9999. You can also chat with them via their app. If you're non-NYU, then please feel free to reach out to 988 or the National Sexual Assault Hotline or National DV Hotline, and we'll put those numbers in our show notes.
Yeah, so it's important to reach out if needed because Danielle and I are having a conversation with Hannah Pennington and Phoebe Rosenfeld from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office in recognition of October's Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And we want to learn more about the DA's office, how the criminal justice system works when reporting a crime. So can you guys share a little bit about yourselves and how you ended up working for the DA's office?
Sure. I'll start. I am Hannah Pennington. I'm the Deputy Chief for Gender-Based Violence Policy at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. I've known Danielle for a long time, so it's very fun to be in my podcast seat with you. I've known you in different roles that we've both had in the ecosystem of sexual violence, gender-based violence resources here in New York City for a long time. And for the last 3 years, I've been lucky enough to work for Alvin Bragg, who is the district attorney for Manhattan, in a unique role that we'll talk about as we're having our conversation. I'm not a career prosecutor. I'm here with one today. You're going to hear from him. And I'm lucky enough to work with Phoebe and others who have been teaching me a lot in the last 3 years. And I thought I knew it all, having been in this space for nearly 25. And I do a lot of work to help the office, not just work our cases, but in addition, show up for survivors the best that we can every day. And I did that work in different spaces. I worked at the mayor's office. Shout out to those colleagues who still do that work on the citywide level, at an office called the Mayor's Office to End Domestic and Gender-Based Violence, where I did a lot of policy work and training work and strategy. And before that, even worked at opened a family justice center in Manhattan, which was the first time I got to partner with the Manhattan DA's office. It's co-located with the district attorney's special victims base. And I'm just so excited to be here for DVAM, as we call it, Domestic Violence Awareness Month. But I would like to talk about these things every day, but I'm glad that in October, we got a lot of people paying attention to it. So,
that's true.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I'm Phoebe. I am an assistant district attorney, which is what every person working at the DA's office under the district attorney is called. And I've been at the Manhattan DA's office for 4 years now. Before that, I was at a law firm. And before that, I was at NYU Law. Yay. And before that, I was a paralegal at the Manhattan DA's office in the sex crimes unit. And I am now a ADA in the Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Bureau, which is kind of a new formed bureau that's kind of come from the sex crimes unit. So I have never been on a podcast before, and so I'm a little nervous, but I love to talk about my job, so I'm very, very happy to be here and to talk about everything.
Yeah, that's amazing. We have so much experience within this space, so thank you both for being here. So when we think of all the media that we're exposed to and that depicts the criminal justice system, can you talk a little bit more about the ADA and maybe this new program that you're talking about, and just about the range of different crimes that you might be seeing within your office, within your role?
Yeah, sure. It's a big question, so I'm trying to break it down. So I work at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, and there are different district attorney's offices in each borough. So Brooklyn has its own, Queens has its own. I work in Manhattan. And what we do is we prosecute all crimes that happen on a state level within the borough of Manhattan. And so that is generally the office will prosecute everything from, shoplifting to obviously homicides and other serious felony crimes. And so that's kind of the job generally. And then so my role in the Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Bureau, we are a bureau that is situated under the Special Victims Division of the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. And so my bureau focuses exclusively on crimes involving intimate partners and sexual violence, and oftentimes those overlap. And notably, we talk about domestic violence, which in our office has a more broad term to include any violence within a family or family members, but we're really focusing on intimate partner violence, so people who have been in any form of intimate relationship, including just a short-lived sexual relationship, that still is considered an intimate relationship for our office, and then sexual violence. And so crimes that we look into. So there's a wide variety. There's no crime that's intimate partner violence crime. It's usually a specific crime that then has been committed between intimate partners. And so that can really be anything. It can be a, petty theft. But the cases that I'm seeing most frequently are criminal contempt, which is when there's been an order of protection that's been issued, instructing one party to stay away from the other party, and that order of protection is violated. That is a charge in itself called criminal contempt. Strangulation, obviously the impeding of the blood or breathing, which causes a number of things: injury, stupor, loss of consciousness, and then obviously assaults with varying degrees among those, all the way up to, obviously, unfortunately, homicides. And then in terms of sexual violence, so there are misdemeanor crimes. Those often include what we call forcible touching, which would be a slap or a grab of someone's intimate parts. We see that a lot on public transit, but also can happen within relationships or at a bar. And then we kind of see everything from unlawful surveillance, which is the filming of a person's intimate parts without their consent. We also see a lot of that in public transit, but also can happen in a relationship or different situations. And then rape, obviously, that is sexual violence that we look into. There are varying degrees of rape. And as I'm sure you know about the new rape is rape law, that now under New York law, any form of sexual contact between penis and vagina, penis and anus, and oral sexual contact, that's all considered rape now.
That's great, because they used to be separated out.
Yes.
And it was really confusing for
very
folks.
much so.
I'm glad that they did that.
And another new change that has been great is that rape used to require penetration, however so slight. Now it only requires contact, which is also very helpful for us, because sometimes victims can't quite describe what the contact was, but they know it touched. And now we don't have to prove anything beyond that, which is awesome.
That's really good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is a long hard fight among advocates that we know that were involved in that for a long time. And it actually came out of a Manhattan case where a victim didn't get justice because of that. And I think it's a good segue to talk about even more intersection that happens within the Special Victims Division, because Phoebe sits within the Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Bureau. And as she said, that is a new piece of our office. It used to be a separate sex crimes unit and a separate domestic violence unit. But before that happened, DA Bragg started the Special Victims Division pretty soon into taking office in 2022. And that includes also elder abuse crime, human trafficking, both sex trafficking and labor trafficking, and also child abuse. And actually, all of the things that Phoebe was saying, that the range, there could be someone who is a victim of sex trafficking that's in that unit, but it could come out of our Intimate Partner Violence Bureau, because often there's intersection there. There could be a child abuse case that includes a domestic violence element. So that is why they're all housed together. But what's also new about it is that all of the assistant district attorneys like Phoebe who work in that division exclusively work in that division. So we've put a lot of resources into our legal staff, which at the DA's office means the assistant district attorneys, who can be specially trained and every day focusing on these very unique, sensitive and labor intensive and sort of resource intensive cases. Not that there aren't others in other parts of the office, but we want the people working on those cases to have that expertise. And it's also increased our investigative staff, our professional staff like Phoebe was before law school, our analysts and our paralegals. So that's another thing for people to know about our office is that when they call the Special Victims Division, all of those people are working together.
That's great. And I do want to just highlight something that you mentioned earlier, that this is like within Manhattan, and DA Braggs is the one who sort of did this. So not every borough is going to look like this. I'm assuming not every borough has it like broken up like this. And so just to say it's unique to this particular borough that you all have this unit, is that correct?
Yeah, it's a great point. And we always try to do that when we're talking to the public too, because I feel like, Danielle, you've even called me about cases that weren't in Manhattan and then connected you to Brooklyn. And in part, we can answer the questions we can answer, and we want everybody to reach out, but everybody does do things differently. It's structured differently. Their prosecution practices are different. Their victim service practice is it's different. So it is, even though we're one city, there are different practices, although we collaborate really closely. And I will say that the kinds of structures that you see in Manhattan, I do think that there are, since the time that I was first working alongside district attorneys' offices, there are new ways of thinking about in general, and you'll hear me say that a lot because that's a lot about what my job is about, is, our approach within district attorneys' offices, frankly, our approach as a city and a country, but in the police department has changed a lot in the last couple decades.
Yeah. Was there anything more that you wanted to add into that like really big question that I asked you?
I'm trying to think. I'm sure
Did we hit everything?
Things will come along as we keep talking, but yeah, I think that's
I'll mention one more thing, actually, which I think is good grounding for the conversation, is just to also mention that within our office, sort of right alongside us, we have our trial division, which is made up of trial bureaus, and most of the work that we're talking about is happening within the Special Victims Division, but our colleagues in the Trial Division also do all of that whole spectrum of crimes that Phoebe was talking about, but even some of the special victims crime that we mentioned. And then really importantly, alongside us as well is the Survivor Services Bureau, which is also a new name. It used to be called the Witness Aid Service Unit. We think this new name is a little more descriptive of what they do, but they're incredible colleagues of ours who are clinicians and advocates who work directly with victims alongside us on these cases to make sure that people have all the supports that they need, even before a case begins, if a case never goes anywhere, just in general, making sure that survivor services are front and center.
Yeah, and I've referred to them quite often, whether they're someone who's made a police report, they're wanting information, who their ADA is, or whether there's an order of protection, or just some of the counselors that are there, because they have like good advocates who can help them navigate the system a little bit differently than I could in my role.
Yeah.
So they're really helpful.
Yeah, so speaking of, victim services and what you guys do, what do you find are the biggest barriers to those who experience sexual assault from engaging with the criminal justice system? And how does your office attempt to assist with these barriers? Is the DA's office engaged in alternatives to incarceration?
And it's a big one, not just at the Manhattan DA's office, but that's something that I think people face, and not just in the criminal justice system. I think systems in general have it can be challenging for people who are experiencing these harms to come forward. It's obviously, I think most people who are in this space know it's consistently underreported. All of these crimes are consistently underreported. So I can start, and then I'll turn it over to you,
Perfect.
Phoebe. I mean, one huge thing, and it is a part of my job, is making sure that we are doing everything we can to engage with our external stakeholders, but that is a huge bucket. That means not only other system actors to make sure that we're all, to the extent that we can, coordinate as much as we can. If someone's walking into one system and they have questions about our system, that they know who to call, that Danielle knows she's at a university. She knows she can pick up the phone and call me, and she does. But that could be the same for our child welfare system or our education system, things like that. We often say that we want to make sure that we're building as many relationships as we can to make sure that we're making sure those partners of ours see us as a trusted partner, so that when a survivor comes into their world who may need help or has questions, there's a way for them to get to us if they don't want to call us. So the other thing is that they can call the district attorney's office directly. I think that's probably something that people don't know. People can go to family justice centers, which we'll put that in the show notes too, and then get to the family justice center. So I think the known barriers that we know, and we could do a 3-day conference about the barriers that survivors face. But it could be mental health issues. It could be the fact that they are facing a criminal charge and don't want to come to it could be the fact that they don't have immigration status. And so we are constantly thinking about that in how we communicate to the world to make sure that people know that part of our efforts to address crime in Manhattan and to try to improve public safety is reaching survivors of crime. And we have done a few new things in the last couple of years that's built off years of community engagement. One of them is the creation of a Special Victims Division Advisory Council, that the DA gets to meet with a really wide spectrum of folks from all over the borough who work with all different kinds of survivors and clients, so that we can sort of shine a light on ourselves and hear from them, like, what is it that we could be doing better? Who else should we be talking to? One of your colleagues here, who is a Title IX professional here at NYU, is on that council, because we want to make sure that we hear the voices of folks working with young people, particularly on campuses. And something also really exciting that I'm personally very excited to see it come to fruition is we've also created a survivor network, which is a group of survivors. I mean, we know in this space, in any space, that many times people who become DAs, people who become social workers, often themselves have experienced violence. And so they bring that into their work. But we don't often expect people to show up for their jobs and give their personal experience. But we do want to hear directly from survivors about how we can make our systems better, how we can improve our practices, and hear about what it was like for them when they went through this, probably one of the hardest things they've gone through. And so we've engaged with consultants who are survivors, who meet with us on a regular basis, and who we stay in touch with. And it's very new and sort of small, and we're growing the network as we speak, so that we can hear from them about how we can do better and how we can break down those barriers.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm thinking about, and this, maybe a challenge for a lot of people, but maybe it's not. I had a recent case that's coming to my mind that had a really challenging interaction with detectives. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering if that's something that comes up in some of the barriers as well, because I see it. Mm-hmm. This person, I was trying to route them to your office, and this person was still oh, I don't know. They feel very connected to the detectives, and the detective, wasn't a safe space for this person to make a report. So are there other internal things that maybe might come up?
Yeah, I mean, you can always call the district attorney's office directly to report a crime. And Hannah will have those numbers for us, but that's always one way of doing it. And what I always say to every survivor that I meet is that we are not the police. We work with the police, but we are not the police. We are a different entity. And so often once the case is brought to us, we become very involved in the case, and we kind of take the investigation from there with the assistance of the NYPD. But, we're not the exact same entity, if that may make people feel more comfortable coming to the DA's office.
I was really trying
instead of going straight to the police. There is always that option. And just kind of what you were saying. I mean, for most survivors that I meet, I always tell them the system kind of sucks. And it's hard on survivors. It asks a lot of survivors, and there's really no getting away around that at this time. Mm-hmm. But we really do our best to try to make it as, you know, as easy of a process as we can, understanding that there are some things that are required from survivors that we just can't do. A lot of times survivors will say, well, can I just write down what happened to me? Or can I just get videotaped and say, and unfortunately in the state of New York, it requires live testimony. We have to have victims come and testify often. And that can be really, really hard and traumatizing. And we understand that. And so that's why we have our Survivor Services Bureau to kind of help them and assist them with all that's coming up with that. And really trying to explain to them the process as best we can and what to expect and everything going forward. Yeah.
And do you often have folks coming and asking for some alternatives to like incarceration or trial as a result of maybe some of these barriers or maybe some of the challenges in having to tell their story over and over again?
Yeah. So, I end every single one of my like initial interviews with, what does justice look like to you in this case? What are you hoping to see from this case? Because obviously that will inform what our decisions are in the case. The reality of some intimate partner violence cases, which at times feels a bit infantilizing, but the reality is sometimes we realize how dangerous the situation is and someone may not see it that way, but we're very concerned based on a pattern of behavior we've seen or someone's criminal history. And so our decisions realistically may not always align with what the survivor is seeking, but it is always something that we keep in mind. And if a survivor says, like, I really just don't think I could do a trial, I can't ever promise it won't get there, but we will always keep that in mind when we're thinking about ways to resolve a case. And I think you had asked about alternatives to incarceration. Yeah. I'm sure Hannah can talk about this more eloquently than I can. But we also do have what we call a Pathways to Public Safety division. And so cases can be kind of put through that path. And once they're screened by our Pathways to Public Safety, we call them Pathways, then they kind of go on an alternative to incarceration track. And so that requires close monitoring with the court and programming designated based on the offense and the needs of the offender. So that's definitely some of the routes that happen. And a lot of our cases don't end up with incarceration. A lot of cases end up with, we have an abusive partner intervention program and other sexual assault programs that sometimes we're able to refer people to. But I also don't want to be misleading. There are some cases that are very serious that we just believe that incarceration is the appropriate result. And we do fight for that in certain situations.
Yeah, and I think that that's a great thing to go back to. The first thing Phoebe said is I just want to highlight is being as informative as we can with survivors and making sure we're staying in touch with them and we're explaining the process, which can be really difficult when you're going through it, let alone when you're just listening to a podcast. I'm sure people aren't necessarily going to remember it all or get it all unless you're like, it's what you do for a living, right? So that's extremely important. And I think it is good to just be realistic about what the system is like right now. But also recognizing that we want to make sure that people have options. So that's why we do want people to know about the criminal justice system and the fact that they can, not if they're a university student, they can go through a process at their campus, but they can also report it to the police and they could also call the district attorney's office. I think being more survivor and trauma informed is simply making sure people know what their options are. That being said, I'm also excited about something new and different that we have started to work on in our office, which does relate to restorative justice. And it all is sort of an offshoot of what Phoebe's talking about, where, we do hear a lot from survivors. And I can speak to my time now, but I can also speak to my time when I was an attorney representing victims in family court and immigration cases. And when I was doing more like policy work at the city level, that there is no question that a really big number of survivors, particularly intimate partner cases, want the person who's harmed them to get access to services and also to get programming. And that is why in the city, in Manhattan, we have what Phoebe was referring to as abusive partner intervention programming. And that can be part of a resolution of a case. And those programs were created with survivor input. But we don't yet have a more widespread use of restorative justice processes in these cases. And that's because these cases are really delicate and sensitive, and both in the sexual violence space, but also in intimate partner violence, there's a lot of power and control dynamics at play. And so I think there is a real need to be very intentional about that. But soon after I got to the office, one of my colleagues who has been in the office for a very long time, one of the deputies in IPSV, her name is Intimate Partner in Sexual Violence, Vanessa, came to me because she knew about the different things I'd worked on before I got here, and just knew that there were a number of cases. And we do want to keep saying this isn't all the cases, not even most of the cases, but there are a subset of cases where it's just very clear, both from most importantly from the victim, because really at its core, restorative justice, it sounds like you're on that path, Danielle, to be doing more restorative justice in your own life, like that it be centered on the person who's been harmed is how from all the training I've done in restorative justice. So we hear from a victim that they're looking for something else, that puts our radar up. Like what more could we be looking at? What could we be doing to help this person? And similarly, the person who caused harm. And this could be in a pre-arrest situation, which does happen pretty regularly in the sexual assault context, but it could even be after an arrest, who has made it clear, either through their attorney or often they come into our office for what's called a proffer, and they're really saying things that also throw up a flag, like, wait, they want to talk, they want to say sorry, they wish that they could explain, or the victim saying, I wish I could talk to why the person did this. And we are at the very nascent stages of this work, but we're partnering with a really well-respected restorative justice facilitator here in New York City, and we've done a couple processes in cases that have been really successful. They're very time-intensive, so it's and it's also not an alternative in the sense that like, oh, we can't make our burden or we can't take this case. That's not what this is about. These are cases that we would take to trial, but for reasons of what we're hearing from the parties, we want to try something different. So more to come on that, but that is something. And I also think that something we've been talking about too is in some of the misdemeanor, and we keep saying misdemeanor felony, just to make sure everybody knows that means like the lower level crimes that you only can face up to a year in jail is a misdemeanor, and felony is above that. Sort of a lot of our violent felony crimes are the kinds of cases that Phoebe is working on. In those misdemeanor sexual violence cases, is there more that we could do like we did in the intimate partner violence space to create programming that's accessible to defendants in not just in Manhattan, but throughout the city, that could maybe create more space for holding people accountable, keeping people safe, but also creating an opportunity for people to become more aware of where their behavior is coming from and how they can change it going forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think another misconception that I think comes up in the criminal justice system is that people will come in and they'll say, well, I'm pressing charges or I'm not pressing charges. I think it's helpful to understand that when a criminal case is started, it is actually not the person pressing charges. It is the people of the state of New York pressing charges against that person. And so that person just becomes a witness. Sometimes that can feel like a little help alleviate some of the pressure that they really haven't pressed charges. It's the state that's pressing charges, and they're just witnesses in that case. But also then people say, well, I don't want to press charges anymore. And sometimes it's hard for us to explain to them, well, it's actually the state pressing charges. And so there's often conversations about that as well.
I think that's a good point. When you think about, a lot of things that maybe that individual might experience, we hear a lot about people who experience harm, having to share a lot of details, maybe that they were intoxicated or using drugs, or maybe like they have a history of some kind of engagement with the criminal justice system. How does that sort of come up in your work? And does that come up in the trials that you're prosecuting? Because it can feel like they're being blamed for something, and we definitely don't want that to happen.
Yes. That's part of the place where I say the system sucks. But, I also think what helps is us kind of explaining why we may be even asking those questions. And so, I always say before I start my interviews with someone, in a sexual violence case, I might say, I am going to ask you what you were wearing that day. It's not because I'm judging you for what you were wearing. This should never happen to you, regardless of if you went out onto the street naked, nothing should happen to you. But it helps us understand when you say, well, they took my pants off, for us to understand how they came off and how we can describe it to a jury as well. So, there is getting into a lot of facts, but to understand why we're asking that. And listen, we have cases where people have been drinking, people have prior criminal histories, people started with a sexual act that they were consenting to, and then they were no longer consenting to it. That happens, and we get it. And I think we have awesome training and trauma-focused training on why that happens, or why someone might say something, or they can't remember all the details up front, or they kind of remember things in piecemeal. They can't put anything in a chronological order, and we get that. And we just try to, be as open as we can about why we're asking certain questions and what to expect. But I understand why sometimes it can feel overwhelming to a survivor to have to go through that. But we just try to do our best, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it's one that we all think about a lot. I think I've said this already, but just to sort of collectively, I think we all, and when I say that, I mean everybody, I think has developed a better understanding of the dynamics of this kind of abuse, and also even just the understanding of trauma, like Phoebe mentioned, sort of how someone's going to relay what happened to them. We understand delays in reporting way better. We understand, that we aren't always going to have physical evidence to prove our cases, but truthfully, that is a new practice. That is different than it may have been before Phoebe and I got to the Manhattan DA's office, or other prosecutors. That's not just Danny, as we call ourselves affectionately, DANY. That is something that has happened in our society, which is a good thing. And honestly, as a person who's relatively new and not as I haven't spent my career prosecuting these cases, I actually think it's so exciting that you invited us to be on this podcast that's called Good Sex, which is fun to get approval from the office to be on your podcast. Because honestly, your whole point, as I've learned from you, Danielle, is to create a space where people feel comfortable talking about sex. That is exactly what we're trying to do in this work as prosecutors. And honestly, I think that the people I work with who are prosecuting these cases are more comfortable talking about sex and about all the things related to sex than most of the people outside of my work life. So I think that they have seen and heard a lot, and they've also gone through so much training to sort of show up for survivors based on how they have shown up. And there's still a lot of room to grow and things we need to fix, but I think we're doing a lot more to do right by survivors in that way.
I also think something that Hannah is wonderful at helping us with is we are really making a push to call experts in the field of intimate partner violence and sexual violence during our criminal trials, and pushing for judges to allow us to have them testify so that they can explain to a lay jury why someone may not have reported instantly, or why their timeline might not be all make sense, or why they might have placated the offender after it happened or while it was happening, or why they might have not fought back. All of these things that are, misconceptions about how survivors should respond in situations like that, or why people in intimate partner violence relationships go back, and why those relationships stay, and having experts who can educate a jury about the realities of these things, so that a survivor can feel more comfortable telling their story in the context of that. And also, I always love going to hear their testimony when they do testify, because every time I learn something new, and I think that's always like a really amazing thing to bring into my own practice.
And it's another way that we're hearing from survivors, because those experts are people who have done really deep, comprehensive work with survivors for many, many years, and also are researchers, and they're really digging into to what Phoebe's talking about. And I think it's another, it is kind of goes back to the first question about sort of how are we how are we communicating all this? What are we doing? Because at the end of the day, the people who sit on those juries, and another thing we have to recognize is that we're taking hard cases. We are taking cases where we can meet our burden, and we feel strongly about that. But that doesn't mean that we get in front of a jury and Phoebe always is going to have a conviction on a case that she tries. And that's okay. Like that is okay if we take hard cases and that is the outcome. It is hard for a survivor. It's hard for a prosecutor. But I think it's an opportunity to educate those jurors who I have a feeling they're going to then go home and talk about these things. I know that's what happens when people go to different trainings or they get to a new job and they hear it, they go home and they talk about it with their family and their friends. So I think that we have been doing it a lot more. I know because I get a lot of the requests for it. It's really interesting to see so much more interest in bringing that level of expertise to the trials. And it's really exciting because I think it has more impact than people even probably realize.
One of the things that's coming up for me, and this is like, bear with me, an old memory where I used to provide training for advocates who would respond in the emergency room. And I think that one of our DAs or one of our special victims detectives had said at some point, well, all of our juries have been like Law and Order blue-pilled, or like they'd all been like, we're consumed with like the CSI and the Law and Order. And so that has biased them on how they show up in a jury. Yeah. And so part of your job is having to, educate them all over again, and bringing in those experts is part of that, to be able to say, this is what, it looks like. This is why people go back to a relationship that they've been abused, in, or this is what BDSM looks like, or this is what, sex works look like, and this is why like someone might be engaging in it. So all those things are complicated. But I also did want to and I'm not as current on the law, but isn't there also like a rape shield law that like protects some of this? Is that still accurate, or has that changed?
So there is a rape shields law. So generally, it does prevent a defense attorney from asking questions about past sexual partners. There are obviously exceptions to that, so I don't want to make a broad statement. But yes, there is, and we always fight for it in situations where we feel like it's inappropriate for the defense attorney to be asking any questions that are covered by the rape shield law.
Okay, I just wanted to check because again, some things changed with different reforms that were happening, and so I wasn't sure if that was something that was in there.
For sure.
I thought that was maybe your way when you bring up Law and Order. Like I'm not Olivia Benson. It's for my family, all the listeners from my family. They did give me a deputy chief hat, but it is a little different in real life.
Yeah, same thing. I used to always be really mad at that show because they never had like a social worker or an advocate really showing up. It was always Olivia Benson.
Yeah, she does it all.
She has the emotional support. And I'm like, no, that's my job. Stop it. So, yeah. Anytime anyone brings that up to me, I'm a little bitter.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to go back to the question about sort of how we are making sure people know all the things that we're talking about today. And one of them is that we do partner closely with the police department, and we do partner closely with their special victims squad in Manhattan and citywide. To your question about the person that didn't have the best experience, I mean, we even do trainings together with them so that, and I'm a big believer in this, and this is how it was set up when we had Family Justice Center trainings. It's like if you understand another person's job and they understand your job, you will be able to collaborate better. So we've been spending a lot of time making sure that we're together in space with those detectives so that we can hear how they're doing what they're doing and they know how we're doing what we're doing, and we can collaborate. And we actually even have a new project in intimate partner violence cases in Upper Manhattan that is doing that coordination and collaboration with the police earlier in intimate partner violence cases, which is not as common as it is in a sexual assault case. And the idea being that we can begin collaborating with the detectives and the domestic violence team at a precinct. We can do better in getting a case stronger, getting the evidence together earlier. But just as importantly, we can be connecting victims to services earlier. Because again, in your example, that person was connected to you and was talking to a detective, but being in touch with law enforcement, being in touch with the district attorney's office is also an important point where someone could actually get assistance outside of the criminal justice case, but get real comprehensive services.
Yeah, because right now this particular person is trying to find like a private lawyer to go with her to follow up with the detectives. And I was like, no, I really just want you to get connected to the DA's office. But I mean, that's her experience, and I can't necessarily like shift that for her. But
for sure.
Really wanting her to understand that like people want to help her, and it doesn't have to necessarily go through the detective. But so I think a lot of private lawyers like, no, you don't need us yet. Like we're not, that's not our specialty. And so it's hard to describe because she's not from this country originally. And so I think that has an impact on a number of our students who aren't, A from New York, B from the US. And so that can really be really confusing when you're going to navigate 100%. These systems.
Yeah.
I think it's confusing for people who are lifelong New Yorkers as well. I think it's a confusing system. And so I understand. It's awesome that we're here to try to describe as best as we can kind of what the process looks like.
That's fair. I think I have a little bit better understanding. I forget that not everyone like has like the 20 years of working in this field, but yeah.
Yeah, like I'm learning so much. Like I did not know that you can contact the DA's office right away. I think that's a very important aspect because I don't know many people that don't know that you can go directly to you guys. You don't have to go to police first if you don't want to. And it's really, I'm really happy that we're getting this out there because that's something, that's just not shared anywhere. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about how you guys respond to domestic violence and sexual violence? I know we've kind of discussed a little bit on all the different aspects, but kind of like walk us through how that would work, how it would work if someone's reporting a crime.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's October. It's upon us. As soon as it's Labor Day, as far as I'm concerned, it is October. And it is a big month to be able to talk about intimate partner violence is what we really mostly are talking about when we talk about Domestic Violence Awareness Month. That's not to take away the experience of other folks who are victims of what we in New York City would call family violence. One of the things that we've already mentioned, but I think is really important to reiterate, is that us putting our intimate partner violence cases with our sex crimes cases was an important thing to do for a number of reasons. One of them is that a lot of the same skill set that we've been talking about and the expertise that we think is needed for these cases is very similar from both of those, even if you think about them very separately. So having those folks work together in the same bureau. But we also know that intimate partner sexual violence, and Phoebe can talk about this because people are prosecuting those cases every day. And I don't know if the public would as much recognize that because I don't think we talk about intimate partner violence, sexual assault, as much as we talk about other forms of violence. And it wasn't that long ago that it wasn't even really recognized as a crime, frankly. And it also is a recognition of the fact that most sexual assault, and Danielle, as someone who's been in the space for so long, knows this better than anybody. Phoebe knows this. Anybody who's like literally in the trenches doing this work would tell you there are very serious cases where someone's assaulted by a stranger, and they happen every day. But much, much more likely that you're going to be harmed and sexually assaulted by someone that you know, either a coworker, someone you just went on a date with for the first time, a family member, an intimate partner. That is just reality. And so it's important for us to talk about that. So I feel like Domestic Violence Awareness Month is like the perfect time to sort of bring us back to that reality. This is something that DA Bragg talks about a lot because of what you started with in terms of like what the media is covering and what's on TV. It's not what we talk about when we talk about sexual violence. I mean, that's what we were saying 20 years ago. And I still think we've moved the needle a little bit, but I still think most people don't recognize how often it's someone that you know and love and trust, which complicates the cases that Phoebe has to prosecute every day.
Well, I think it's also educating the person who is experiencing it, because oftentimes, like in some of my work, it is also around letting them know the various different forms of abuse and violence that they might have encountered, right? Because oftentimes when someone has experienced sexual violence within the context of an intimate partner, they may not see it as the worst situation because maybe they're just not engaged in it. They're like, oh, I have to get there in order to, not get my children being hurt or to get the money that I need to get groceries, right? And so it's like, well, I'm not engaged in it. I'm not saying no, but there's threats and coercion that's involved, and so it's like they're not always thinking about the traditional construct of what our media and what different people have like defined as sexual assault. So it's also not just educating the rest of the world, but educating the people who are going through it. Because when I would screen for those things, like it would just be skipped over. No, there's emotional abuse, there's physical abuse, there's financial control, there's, yes, all of that. But like they wouldn't quite identify with the sexual abuse. And so I think it's also like, no, this is something, if you're being coerced or threatened, that doesn't mean it's a, hell yeah, like I want to do this, right? Like that's not like good sex.
Well, it's back to why you have to have a podcast called Good Sex. It's because people don't want to talk about it generally, let alone when it's abusive. And in their, it makes perfect sense to me that people wouldn't see it that way, especially if they're in the throes of a really manipulative, abusive relationship. I'm sure you see that a lot.
Of course. I mean, I'll have conversations with people who have reported one thing to the police, and we kind of talk more about the relationship and about what's been going on in the relationship. And, lo and behold, we've kind of discovered that there's also been sexual violence in the relationship. And sometimes that's something we can charge and prove in court. And exactly to your point, we've had cases where someone comes in and they say, they assaulted me and I was injured. And then he said, let's have sex, or whatever, he or she, anyone can be an offender, but let's have sex. And the person just had sex to not get hurt again. And that's a case that we would take very seriously and look into charging as a sexual assault. And so I think there's, unfortunately, a lot of crossover in this space, which is kind of why we're looking at it from both angles.
I think when our boss, Justin McNabney, who's the chief of special victims, who I think you've met before, Danielle, he and I, in talking about this new bureau, one of the things he said was even just naming that, because so often, and he reflected like you, Phoebe, like survivors that he worked with who didn't disclose sexual violence. And I would say, in my experience a long time ago when I represented victims in family court, it could be I worked with the person for 9 months and they told me these horrible things that had happened, and we put it into the papers if it was an order of protection case or a custody case. And it wasn't until months, maybe even like a year later, that they would say something. And then often they would say, I don't want you to include that. They didn't want me to share it because it was too shameful. And so much of this is very shameful, but sexual violence can be even like on a different level. Like, I just can't do it, Hannah. I'm not going to talk about that, Yeah.
Definitely hard to talk about some of these things. I want to just give space if we've left anything out of this conversation that you all feel like would be helpful for us to bring in and to chat about. Maybe we've just done a perfect job too, but like I want to just tune in before we
I think there's something that I wish I could tell every single survivor, and I can understand why some survivors are still hesitant to go to the hospital. But if you have been sexually assaulted, you can go to a hospital. It has to be a hospital. It cannot be an urgent care. That is often also a misconception. You can go to a hospital and get a rape kit in the colloquial terms, a safe kit, done at the hospital, and you do not have to release it to the police at that time. You do not have to start a criminal investigation if that's not something you're ready for yet. But going and getting the kit, A, just to make sure that you're fine and healthy and you've been seen by doctors, and B, if you later decide that that is something you're interested in pursuing, obviously that kind of evidence is great for us in a lot of cases. And so I would just encourage someone to go and get checked out, and they don't have to start the criminal process if they don't feel like it. And at the later time, if they want to release it to the law enforcement, they can. And we understand the barriers to reporting crimes, of course, but I will just also stress, our cases get stronger with the more evidence we can bring forward, and that includes video evidence, which has been crucial in a lot of our cases. And unfortunately, retention periods for video sometimes is not so long. So I just want to call that to attention. Obviously, we understand why people may delay in reporting, and we still go forward on those cases, but just something to keep in mind is that when you are able to report it earlier, we can start the investigation earlier, and that can sometimes help us get some really helpful evidence.
Yeah, I think that's great. Also, for listeners, tune in to season 1, episode 1, where we talk about the forensic evidence collection kit.
Well,
we have an examiner who. So
great.
definitely, we want to encourage folks to reach out. The Student Health Center doesn't provide an evidence collection kit either. It does require that you go to a hospital, and our crisis response counselors at Wellness Center will accompany folks either virtually or meaning on the phone, or we'll go with them if that is something that they are interested in to help them get there. And we want to make sure they have support afterwards. So the Student Health Center will provide services in the aftermath as well. And that will be someone who might get referred to me.
No, I think it's a great point. And I'm so glad you brought it up, Phoebe, because I think it's part of that right from your original question, what do you want people to know? And I think we also need to partner closely with, and we do, our hospital partners. And I think one of the things that, to your point about the evidence is, and also people's physical and mental well-being is getting the care that's there. One of the things Phoebe mentioned earlier, unfortunately, is so many of the cases that we're seeing now are not what we call near fatal strangulation. And we used to call it non-fatal strangulation. But the truth of the matter is any strangulation is nearly lethal. And there is a lot of work being done in prosecutors' offices, but also in the medical field to better, importantly, to better identify when someone has been nearly strangled, because there are very serious physical health impacts that can be long-lasting to people. And I hate to say it, but most of the time people are strangled, they do not get the health care that they need. So we really want to talk more about that as a city, and the city has brought people together to do that. We're going to be having a emergency room doctor who we consult with on these cases actually have one of her colleagues come and sit with us a lot of the time while they're doing their forensic medicine rotation, so that they can educate us and we can educate that person about what our cases require. But again, most importantly, so that victims can get connected to care. So that's big on the list of what we want survivors to know.
Well, also, and changing the language, because even, I remember when that was a real big push in the medical community to change it to strangulation, because I think a lot of folks come in using different language that is minimizing.
Totally.
And so even I think when people come in and saying, oh, this happened, and I'm like, that's strangulation.
Yeah.
And so really just helping them with that language too. So I appreciate you.
And it wasn't a crime. Yeah. So this is one of the times when I can say that I literally was doing this work when strangulation was not a crime.
Yeah.
It took a long time. And while I was a practitioner, there was a huge push. There was actually a high profile case where a government official had repeatedly been arrested. And the way that the case was described was that I think just not strangulation, choked or put even just grab my neck, whatever it was. And that was the final push, because I think that person got prosecuted for harassment or something. Mm-hmm. It got, brought down to a charge that did not reflect what had been happening to this survivor. And so it is a relatively new crime. So we're figuring it out. But I think that's partly why we're seeing more of them, because we're educating ourselves and we're working with the police and how they identify it. But it's a really important thing to talk about.
So what services and resources would you want to share, specifically? I know we've talked a little bit about the different places, but can you share anything else?
Sure, yeah. So we want to make sure, as we've said, that people know that they can call us. And we're talking here today about intimate partner and sexual violence. So we wanted to give you the number for our Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Bureau, which is 212-335, let's see if I get it right, 9373. And we also importantly wanted to make sure that everybody knows that they can also, that is a helpline. It's not a hotline. So it's being picked up during the day, during work days. But if people don't know, there's also a 24-hour hotline for the city. And I'm also really excited to call it what it is now called, which is the NYC Hope Line. And the reason why I'm excited about that is because it is a hotline that is available to people who are intimate partner violence victims, trafficking victims, sexual violence, you name it. There were multiple hotlines in my time, and they are now one. It's run by the mayor's office, and it's 1-800-621-HOPE, and it's going to be in the show notes. And people can call that number at all the time, and they can also get information if they need to talk to someone in the middle of the night, they can get information about the district attorney's office. They can get information about one of the 5 family justice centers that see survivors across the city too.
Yeah, and that's city specific, not like nationwide.
That is New York City specific. Yeah.
Excellent.
I mean, the only other thing I would mention, and I imagine based on what she does every day, Phoebe will agree with this, is that we also want to make sure that people understand we know how important prevention is. It's something that our office and DA Braggs talks about, like in lots of contexts, not just in this context, because we want to be part of, creating change, which we may not see anytime soon. So I would also just really encourage young people, old people, anybody listening to the podcast, just need to talk to my children. They'll tell you they're experts in healthy relationship training, talking about consent. Like these are things that it's why it's good that you have a podcast that's talking about sex, because it's an opportunity that I didn't get as a young person. Yeah. I think I can. And that relates to domestic violence, sexual violence. It sort of affects all the things that we're seeing every day. So I can never not make a plug for healthy relationships.
Oh, amen. I have a workshop that NYU students can go to.
Excellent.
We have lots of different programs within the Student Health Center that we also try to promote, because we also want to try to prevent our students from encountering something like this, to avoid having to see you all.
Yes.
That's what we hope. We always say, in I think our field, we'd love for you this to never happen again.
Yes.
We'd put ourselves out of a job if we could, but we know that it's going to happen. So we want good people like you all to be able to respond if they do happen to experience it. So thank you both so much for being here.
Thanks for having us. Thanks for having us.
Questions or feedback? Email us at goodsex.podcast@nyu.edu. We typically respond within 3 to 4 business days. We know we can't cover everything in one episode, so if we missed something, got something wrong, or something didn't sit right with you, we'd love to hear from you. Check out our show notes for links to books, organizations, or other resources. If you have questions about your sexual health and you're an NYU student, you can reach out to our sexpert at sexpert@nyu.edu or book an appointment through the Student Health Center portal. If you're facing an urgent mental health or safety concern, NYU's Confidential Wellness Exchange is available 24/7 at 212-443-9999 via their app, or wellness.exchange@nyu.edu. For non-NYU listeners, you could call the National Sexual Assault Hotline at 1-800-656-4673 or the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Tune in next time, and don't forget to subscribe for more good sex at NYU.